Great. Hey there, I'm Kelly Filetto, and welcome to the Grit, Guts, and Courage show. So this is the show where we chat with people who have been through something, some sort of a challenge, and somehow they found the grit, guts, and courage to get through it. So today we're chatting with Tammy Gross, and I just love her story. And I'm really excited about having her on because I'm not sure I know what she's going to talk about. Whereas some of my other guests, I kind of have a general idea, but with Tammy, I don't. So Tammy, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm still trying to decide what am I going to. No, I know exactly what I think I'm going to say, but like we were just saying, I'm a talker, so you never know what's going to come out.
Well, tell us the story.
Well, I have a few stories, and I know that you know a couple of my stories, but my what? Tell me exactly what the order is of how you say it again. Guts,
grit, guts, and courage.
What starts it? Okay, and courage. Well, it's interesting because those two actually go together because my guts fell apart a few years ago and I turned into a wimp and I needed to find some grit. So that's actually kind of my story. And then through that is when I started having courage to do things. So that actually is like perfect. It's a perfect way to describe what I've been through. I am an editor of screenplays. And I started doing that back in 2008 is when I started writing. And in 2010 is when I started helping other people because I was kind of getting at least the functions of it. And, storytelling is hard, but I learned a lot when I was doing that. And I hung a new shingle. I had already been a musician pretty much my whole life. And the shingle that I had already hung back in 2000, almost exactly, years wise, because it was in March. But anyhow, so that was really my foundation for being an entrepreneur. And I had been arranging music for churches all around the world, for bands, for solo artists, for all sorts of different people. And I knew what it was like to work online. And I knew that I was a facilitator. So I learned a lot about myself there. I also learned how to get business and bring people to me and stuff because I understood SEO, which is, keywords and things like that. And so when I hung my shingle to also become an editor and a screenwriter and a ghostwriter and all the different things that I was doing and book editor as well, I learned and did everything the same way and it all was working. And then in 2018, apparently, Google changed an algorithm. So that just changed everything. But it took me about 6 months to figure out, why am I suddenly not getting any clients? Because I was always number one. For one thing, in both situations, I created something that never existed. There was nobody who was doing what I was doing when it came to the arrangements and the way I was doing that. And there was nobody who was editing screenplays. There was just nobody who was doing that. Now there's a zillion people doing it because I tend to do that. I tend to work myself out of jobs. But at the time I was the only one. So I had no real worries or anything, but everything just started to fall apart because all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's getting harder to pay my bills. Where's all that money I used to have left over at the end of the month and stuff. And so it took all that time. A lot of worry was setting in. It took another 6 months for me to figure out what to do about the problem. And that was freaking me out because here I am an editor, have to spend a lot of time doing work for other people. When am I supposed to create content? Because that was the answer I kept coming up with. It's now a content game. It's not about SEO. It's not about keywords. And as I was figuring that out, I was worrying myself pretty much to death. And I got this, I don't want to get into the medical, but I got a stone, basically. It was like a liver stone or a gallstone. Nobody knows what it was. And they had to get rid of it because it was killing me. And the way they got rid of it, basically, they almost killed me because they had to blow it out of my intestinal system, the common bile duct. Anybody who knows about that stuff, it's probably common to a lot of people, but to me it was like, what? And I almost died a few times because the way they did it, basically, and they even told me ahead of time, you're going to get pancreatitis now. And that's what I got. And that's a scary thing, right? Because whenever we think of the pancreas, we're always thinking about how that's the cancer that people die from, right? And so, and it's a very, this organ is a very interesting organ that I still don't know that much about. I don't want to know that much about it. All I know is I wanted to survive it. and so it was a 2-year journey in and out of the hospital. And then when I was done with it, my business was pretty decimated. And then we went straight into COVID. So it was a very interesting journey that way as well. Of course, COVID didn't affect me too much as an editor and as all the things that I was doing, because I was kind of a professional stay-at-homer type worker anyhow, professional isolator. But it really did change things when it comes to my attitude. I felt like I could just conquer the world before all that happened. But being close to death and having no control over anything, and having doctors and nurses controlling my days and everything, and taking me away from what I knew, and not having any control over like what is next for so long, just broke me somehow. And I just became a wimp. I became a total wimp. And then there was somebody, Pete Vargas, I have to give him credit. He brought together a whole bunch of people early on after the COVID shutdown. And he brought in like 75 amazing people without limbs, people like yourself who have been through like burn situations, and people who have lost everything and then built it up, and just amazing people, the Tony Robbins type, and Tony Robbins was one of them. and all that happened in such a short amount of time, in just 3 weeks time. So it was like every day I was getting these messages, and it really changed everything. It changed not only me, but it also changed my attitude toward people who have these amazing stories. I was already loving working with people like Shia LaBeouf, who was telling his own personal story to tell the what became the movie Honey Boy. And so I loved when people told their own stories. And now I knew that people had really life-changing stories that could truly change lives, because they were changing mine. And I got this word for the year. And that's why that's so cool that this is what it is that I got this word, and it was grit. I needed grit. I had become this wimp. I needed gumption. I needed resilience. Here's the coolest word in the world, but the hardest one to say: indefatigability. And that means basically that you just can't be put down, that nothing is going to put you down if you're indefatigable. And then it's such a fun word to say. And then tenacity. Basically, they all kind of mean the same thing, but they all have their own little thing. And so that's what I lived by. And it really changed me. I really did develop that grit. And I eventually had courage to move on to the next year and to start, living out a courageous life. So it really, it just goes perfectly with what you talk about. And it resounds with me, because sometimes we do get into our lives in certain situations where it's like, I don't have control. How am I supposed to be strong through this? Everybody else is in control of me right now, And that's what had to happen. I had to do it. I had to just take it and take control.
I love your story, because I still remember when COVID hit, and I used to do a lot of keynote speaking. So I was gone a lot.
Right.
And then all of a sudden COVID hit, and my cancellations started happening. And I had 3 teenage kids at home, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I laid on the couch for a week. I did not get off the couch for a week. I filled up my fridge, before they did the lockdown. I filled up my fridge. I spent like $500 on clothes or on food. And I laid on the couch for a week, and I thought, what next? What am I going to do? And then that's when I pivoted into, coaching people on how to write books and become best-selling authors. And COVID has been, one of the best things for me. But again, just like you, we had to go through the grit, the guts, and the courage to make that change. And a lot of people didn't want to make that change.
Exactly. I mean, the big word that came out of that whole thing that a lot of us, are probably sick of hearing at this point, and I think you just said it, pivot. We all had to learn to pivot. And that is not something, I'm not a graceful person. So I don't, like in dancing, I can't pivot. And in life, I'm less graceful. It's like, I don't want to pivot. I don't like change. I don't want to, so it was a very hard thing to do. But I think all of us have learned we have to. If we want to keep moving forward, we have to.
So my next question is, how did you get through it? I know you talked about Pete Vargas and that event. Was there something else that you did to get through it?
I actually had some nurses, they were going through their own thing, I mean, because I was in and out of the hospital through that as well, because I thought I was done by the time we hit the COVID thing and everything. I thought I was done with the hospitals, but I had a few more setbacks, and I still was not done until January of 2021 was the last time, or February of 2021 was the last time I was in the hospital. And those setbacks brought me back, and I see them struggling as well. But I had a couple of them just say how they couldn't believe how well I was doing. And it was really interesting, because I'm like, I don't know if I was doing this well in the first part, before I was like learning to have this grit and everything. So one of the ways I got through it is that I just kept mindful of it every day. I made it a daily thing to have to wake up wanting to find that grit, find that, where's my gumption? I used to be the most filled with gumption person in the world. I would just do whatever. And it's like, where's that resilience? And, where's that tenacity? So I evaluate at the beginning of each day. That's how I got through it, is I would just like evaluate how am I feeling? And then how am I going to make a plan to make this day work better? I know that sounds kind of corny probably, but remember, I was sitting in a hospital bed, so I could actually do that. So I know for real life, adding another thing where you have to do some evaluation, self-evaluation, but it was really important for me, and it still is, and I still do it. There are times when I get into a situation where it's like I'm freaking out, and then I just have to take that breath, and I just have to stop and evaluate, and then I can start making the plan of, okay, how do I move forward out of this?
I love that. Okay, so you've got someone sitting in front of you, and they're going through something very similar to you. What would you tell them to do?
I think I would have to tell them to, like I said, with the evaluate, but I think the thing that they need to evaluate is not just how they're feeling or anything, but like, what is it that has you really lost right now? What is most lost? And usually if we're lost, it's because we've lost sight of where we're going. So what's that goal that you've lost that you need to reestablish or redefine? And I think that's just where I would start. It's just, what's your goal and how are you going to start moving toward it?
I love it. Okay. So cool. So what's the gift in it? A lot of times we see something tragic like that, and we see it like so painful, and it's so hard, and it's like, how are we going to get through it? I remember COVID was big for me that way. How am I going to get through it? I got 3 kids to support, and mortgage to pay, and all this stuff, and food and all that. And what's the gift? And the gift for me is that these last 3 years have been my best years financially ever. So for me, it was a gift when COVID hit. Even though it was challenging, it was still a gift. So what is the gift in the story?
Interesting. Well, I'm in a weird place in life with my age and where I've been at with my different careers and stuff. So I feel like I'm on my 3rd life, but maybe even on my 4th life. And I think that's part of it is that, I have to figure out, which part of my life am I in? Where do I want to go? And it helped me figure out that I had lost a dream. I had lost a vision in everything, not just goals, but like a vision. And I think it was Kimberly Crow who was the first person who introduced me to, not that I had never heard of it, but I'd never done it, a vision board. And that was a gift, because it brought me back to thinking big, dreaming big. I had dropped some opportunities even before I got sick, even before the whole Google algorithm thing. I had been kind of wandering anyhow, so this was kind of a wake up call to kind of get my vision back. And I had to really think about it. It took a while for me to figure out, okay, this is where I'm going with my life. This is what I want in my life. This is what I have in my life. And now there's like a plan. It's not just shifting and drifting and going through it. Now I can be purposeful.
I love it. Okay. So what else do you do? I know you do editing and stuff, but you also do script stuff and
Oh, yeah.
screenplay. So what else do you do?
Well, I am a screenwriter, and I keep taking on clients who either want me to write their screenplay for them, like from their book, or the opposite. They want me to turn their screenplay into a book, and it's been really fun doing that because I get to learn all these really cool stories of people who are making a difference in the world, and they're telling their own stories. But I love the fiction too. Give me a good old, I don't really watch those, but I love to read like an apocalypse zombie, nightmare or something. That's okay with me. I don't care what it, unless it's porn. I don't need to look at that. But I love all these different genres and everything. So for me, I feel like I have kind of a dream job because I'm helping people to tell their best story, whether it's about themselves, whether it's something they dreamt up or whatever, because it feeds their soul to be able to tell it, as well as it can also feed the souls of their audience. And so I help people do that. I help people. I do a lot of coaching now. I wasn't doing that before. In fact, I was hiding before all of this, before Pete Ferguson, all the people who are out there doing things. It's like I was the one who was hiding, and it's like I'm just an editor. That's all I do. I help you format it, and I'll do some ghost writing. But ghost was the key word there. And so now I get out there, and I'm running a network where so that filmmakers and storytellers and story sellers can all come together and everything. And that's part of what I love helping people do also, is come out of their shell. And writers like a dark den, a nice dark cave that they can go to, and they never have to see the light of day, and they can just write. And I like bringing them out of that and bringing them to the light of day and seeing that there's more to their story. Their story is part of their story, no matter what the story is that they're telling, that they're part of it.
That's great. Okay, so what are some words of wisdom that you'd love to share? Some last words of wisdom.
Well, I think what sums up what I do, what I feel, what I love, and what I think is what your listeners, your readers, your audience, anybody that you work with, I think anybody can benefit from realizing that we all have a story to tell. And that story can literally change the world. We see it all the time with big and little stories, and it can just change the world. And the only way to get out there is to actually tell it, however that is, whatever medium that's in. So your story can change the world. So go out and tell it.
That's fantastic. I love it. And of course, one last thing, how can people get in touch with you?
Pretty simple. I call myself the scriptpreneur. That's the least simple part of it, because most people are saying it. It's actually not as hard to spell as you might think it is, but it's scriptpreneur. So it's Tammy at scriptpreneur.com.
Great. Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much, Tammy. I loved hearing your story of grit, guts, and courage. I can relate because of, what I went through with COVID. And I'm so glad that you found the courage to get through it all. You would never know, by your smile and the glow that goes around you about, that you had to struggle so hard, because you just look amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
You're very welcome. Okay.